Everyone, I'm Dorothy Haskell and I help with Project Forecast. Our mission for this grant is really to help develop a more trauma-informed workforce. And one of the primary ways that we do that is using problem-based learning simulations. So I hope in this next just few minutes to just orient you to what problem-based learning is. So essentially, problem-based learning is just one way to really intentionally be a critical thinker. So there are structured steps, and the whole goal is really to make us think carefully and well about complicated things. So with PBL, we really want to move beyond simply just knowing information to how to apply that knowledge, because it doesn't do any child or family any good if we're not able to put our knowledge into action. Problem-based learning really empowers people to learn about subjects through the experience of really looking at a complex, real-world, open-ended problem. In other fields, it may be a more traditional problem. How do we create some kind of engineering device? And so in our child and family serving sectors, it's not that the child or family are the problem. But we know that there are a number of challenges that our society faces, that kids and families are facing. And so it's really not thinking of them as problems, but really the circumstances. And how do we look at this complexity in a very critical and wise way? Throughout problem-based learning, you're not going to have the traditional teaching experience or the traditional classroom experience. The facilitator's role is really to support and guide and monitor the learning process of the training space. It is not to lecture. So this is as lecture-y, hopefully, as we will get, and you will, I think, have a very interactive, it's highly based on experiential learning and adult learning principles. So we hope you enjoy it. You can see on this slide, and we'll talk about each step in the future slides, but there are 4 primary steps and they build on each other. So our facts that we'll talk about more really should drive our hunches and hypotheses, which should drive the actions we take in the real world, which should drive the new learning and research that we take on as professionals, which then brings new facts and new information. And so this is an ongoing cycle and can really be applied in a huge range of situations. The first step in PBL is looking for the facts. And facts are usually found just by using those common journalistic questions. So who, what, where, when, how. We're not looking at whys with facts. And so again, different sources of information may highlight different facts. It's important to think about, where that information comes from. But really, we want to start with what knowledge is known. So even though facts don't look at why, hunches and hypotheses do. We do think that why things happen matters, but we're not going to call that a fact. So we want, though, hypotheses to really be based on facts. So for instance, the hypothesis might be Cinderella was scared of punishment if she missed her curfew. The facts that support that might be because her eyes widened when she looked at the clock, she ran away and said, "I must leave and go home or I will be in terrible trouble," direct quote. So that hypothesis is grounded in 3 separate facts that we may have identified during that first listing of factual information. And it kind of leads to a pretty strong rationale for why that hypothesis may be true. Sometimes we don't have quite as much hard data, but we just get this kind of gut hunch feeling, this intuitive sense that something is wrong, and we don't have enough information yet, but we know we probably need to get some. And this is that really important intuitive piece, but we're going to call that a hunch. Often it's based on our own experiences, information we've learned along the way, etc. So So in this case, a hunch might be Cinderella was scared of being hurt emotionally if she dated a prince. That might come from what we know about teenage relationships, etc. So we don't know that for sure, but it's just like this gut feeling that there's some kind of fear of dating. Um, and and to both of these ends, right, it's really important that we include kind of counter hunches and hypotheses. If we are only looking at one side of a story, she has to be afraid of punishment from her family. We also need to consider other things. And so these are two examples of different ways to look at a similar reaction. But we need to always make sure we're bringing in both sides. To really make sure that we're thinking critically and not just going with our initial first thoughts. We have our facts and hunches and hypotheses written out. We can really think about what to do next. And ideally, these next steps are always going to help clarify these hypotheses or hunches by getting more information and getting some answers. So, if the hypothesis is that Cinderella is scared of punishment, a next step might be to assess Cinderella's safety. Maybe you do a home visit, maybe you do an interview, but you're going to look at what that fear is. If the hunch is she's afraid of dating or she didn't like the prince, you may just ask her thoughts around those things, right? What are your thoughts on dating? What was your experience of the prince? And that is a simple but effective way to get information about her perception. Next steps are always kind of those actions that we take in the real world, and they are going to help us better understand or help address a problem. So, in this case, discussing her thoughts about the prince and her thoughts about dating will help us better understand her perception, better understand the motivation for leaving, and assessing safety is going to help address the issue of safety if that's real, while also getting more information. So it's a pretty helpful next step if that hypothesis is driving our work. Step in this whole PBL cycle is learning issues. And learning issues really can help us maximize our next steps. Time is almost always of the essence and valuable. And so, if we can equip ourselves with knowledge and training and get more information without having to necessarily go to the client directly, et cetera, that can really help our work and ensure that we're rooting our efforts in the evidence and, again, being really critical consumers of information. So, in this little example, right, we may want to learn more, like what are the best ways to assess safety of a teenager? What medieval resources might be available to Cinderella if we were going to refer her for additional supports? How does one go about accessing a fairy godmother? Is that available on demand? Can she access her at any time? Is it just random? What tools are available to help teens develop relationship skills? So if it is just a fear of dating, what are some good resources we could give her to help her begin to not run away when she's interested in someone? And maybe there's some cultural things we need to learn, right? So is there any cultural meaning related to leaving a shoe for a potential suitor? I don't know that. So, there's always things we can learn. I love PBL because it does, I think, just emphasize that importance of lifelong learning. The work that we do with kids and families is so important. And if we stop learning, then we are not going to be serving to the best of our abilities. So this learning issues is embedded within each one and should just drive our curiosity for real help and benefit in the world. So I hope this was kind of a fun example and a way to really look at this cycle. But again, just wanted to root us again that this is a constant learning model. We're always going to be learning new facts. We're always going to develop new hypotheses. There will always be new things that we need to do and to learn about. And so I hope that this helps you, and we're really excited to apply this in a problem-based learning simulation with you.